Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report, Thursday's edition. And folks, as you may have heard, late breaking news, there was a ceasefire reached in the Israeli-Hamas conflict. We'll get into that in just a little bit, but first I wanted to introduce a very special guest, Floyd Brown. Welcome to the Schaftlein Report. Floyd is the founder of Western Journal, which is one of the most popular on-site web pages. Floyd, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about Western Journal and how you started it, and then we'll get into the news of the day.
Well, Mark, it's great to be with you. Thanks for the invite. Western Journal aims to provide real truth. And in a world full of fake news, it's sometimes difficult to ferret out what the real truth is, but truth is what we try to bring you. And as the Bible says, the truth will set you free. And so we just try to provide our readers. We have about 1 million readers a day, 1 million to 1.5 million readers a day that read the Western Journal. And we just try to do the best we can every day to bring really accurate news to people. So,
well, let me ask you a question along those lines before we get to the topic. So much news in the mainstream media now. You can't trust it. I mean, it's the mainstream media trying to influence opinions and influence the story and be the story rather than reporting the story. And what distinguishes Western Journal from, again, CBS, NBC, ABC, Washington Post, New York Times, you know the drill, the liberal media out there.
Yeah, well, you can see my gray hair. So I've been in media a long time. And when I started in media, it was who, what, when, where, why, how, okay? And you were trying to find out what the facts were. And you really weren't trying to color what was going on with your opinion. You were just trying to give people really an understanding of the facts, and then they could make their own decisions. It was empowering to people. And then the neo-Marxists took over all the journalism schools in America, and they put and installed a number of radical faculty, and the shift in journalism schools changed to what they call advocacy journalism, which is, it's not about sharing with people anymore the facts of what's really happening on the ground. It's about painting a picture with a narrative that will drive the reader to a number of conclusions that favor big government, favor leftist policies, favor leftist politicians. And so it's really the progressive agenda on steroids in news. And the old days of shoe leather journalism, I'm sad to say, are almost dead, but it's what we try to keep alive at Western Journal. That's why we're always talking about the truth and trying to discover the truth is because we believe in that old-fashioned vision of journalism, which is bring people the facts, and they're pretty smart. They're able to make decisions on their own, and they make pretty good decisions. So we're hopeful that it will empower people and give people the information they need to make really good decisions. But no, journalism has been turned on its head. It's really almost raw sewage out there when you hook up to the mainstream media. It's a real wasteland and not much news at all.
And Floyd, with one thing again that we've noticed, I mean, again, going back, New York Times, Washington Post, etc., you lump them all in the same category. It seems like on our side of the ledger, whether it's Western Journal, Schaftlein Report, Fox News, Newsmax, etc., our side of the ledger is somewhat fractured. In other words, people on the left, it doesn't really matter whether they go to MSNBC, CNN, New York Times. I mean, they're getting the same story with the same slant from every one of those distribution centers. Our side is more fractured, and frankly, it seems somewhat of an issue where if we could somehow coalesce around what our message is, that could maybe change the situation.
Well, on the right, we are rugged individualists, which means we all like to run our own companies. We all like to run our own lives. We really, we don't get together and create narratives. We kind of let the facts dictate what the narratives might be. And so as a result of that, you don't get this cohesive narrative that you get many times from the left. And the left is very much a top-down driven kind of a system. And most of the major news organizations now are owned by left-wing billionaires. They're owned by, Jeff Bezos, or they're owned by Steve Jobs' wife, I think, owns one of the major publications, or they're owned by the people that founded eBay. And so what you have is this narrative of really almost out of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is more important to the news now than New York, Washington, D.C., or capitals around the globe. It's really what these people want to shove down your throat is what the narrative will be. And you're right, it's monolithic, and especially since the adoption of the woke culture, and everything's about race, nothing's about anything but race, and so you get this really jaded and disjointed view of America, and it's really hurtful. And a lot of people are right now, for example, just quaking in fear, locked in their houses, not willing to come out as a result of the massive amount of fear mongering done by the media over the coronavirus. I'm a survivor of the coronavirus, so it wasn't pleasant to have the coronavirus, but most people like me survive it. It's not an automatic death sentence, but the reporting on it was so over the top that people think, you're gonna die, you're gonna die. It was just pure fear mongering. And so the residual of that is, now that the pandemic is waning, people still won't come out of their houses because they're living in fear. And it's really hurtful to the country. It's hurtful to people. And it's not a good situation. And, I don't know what's going to fix it either.
Well, let me ask you this, Floyd, along those subjects, and then I want to get on the Israeli thing in a minute. But, you talked about the pandemic. Well, look what we have now. We have a vaccine that I think I saw today, 50% of the American public have actually taken the vaccine. We have people who've had COVID that have the antibodies. Okay, but in spite of all that, and with the CDC coming out and saying, if you go indoors and you've been vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. And yet Nancy Pelosi is putting in these ridiculous rules that Congress is still going to be wearing masks, even though the CDC says you don't. And we still have our president, again, as we always say, folks, we wish the best for our president. He's the president of all of us. But Floyd, I got to tell you, he looks stupid walking around there with a mask. The man's been vaccinated. Everyone that gets within 20 yards of him has to be vaccinated. And yet he still wears that stupid mask around. And Pelosi's making people in Congress wear a mask, and they're not happy about it.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, if the vaccine doesn't work, why did everybody go out and get it?
Well,
or it works, then why are they all wearing masks?
That's the piece I'm going down. I mean, again, when the CDC, that's our government, says if you've been vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. Now, again, some private businesses, if they want to require, that's their business. It's private business. But a lot of places are opening up. Drugstores, grocery stores, supermarket, the country is opening up. Why in the world is Congress? I'll answer my own question. Why are they doing it? Because they want to continue to put fear in people. They want to be able to demonstrate control, and they want to continue to push through these gargantuan spending bills that at some point, we'll talk about that a little bit later. That's my opinion, why they want to continue to do this.
Well, yeah, this has been the mother lode for big government. You're absolutely right. Whenever you look at these situations, you got to follow the money. I mean, just the money that the pharmaceutical companies themselves have made across this pandemic, it's just been monumental. But it's not free market money. It's socialist money. It's money from the government. It's money from you and me and from the taxpayers. And even worse, from our heirs that haven't even been born yet. This debt now is so large that they're going to be paying it off for generations. Literally, they're talking now about never paying off the debt because it's so large the country can't ever afford to pay it off. So you're right. We've become too political as a nation. And the reason we've become so political is because government has become such a huge part of our lives. When I was young, we didn't really think that much about government because it didn't dictate our lives. It didn't tell us, oh, you have to wear a mask when you get on an airplane. Boy, I mean, I remember the days when you could climb on an airplane. You didn't even go through security. Yeah. You just went and got on the airplane.
A lot of things.
All of that's.
A lot of things changed.
A lot of that's changed, and as it's changed, government has just grown and grown and grown. And as a result of that growth, there's a lot of people that make really good money living off that government. And, some of them are union leaders. We've got a lot of unions that have huge control in government. That's what's happened out in California. The teachers union and the SEIU now are the two biggest donors to political candidates. They've totally decimated the oil industry, which used to be a big player out in California. And so now it's, for the government, by the government, all the time. And really government makes decisions, not based on what's great for the populace. They make decisions based on what's great for government. A classic example of that in California is the homeless situation. I mean, the homeless are just running out of control in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco. Normal people are leaving in droves because they've got, tents camped out on their front lawns, and their sidewalks have, urine and even more unpleasant things on them. And nobody is controlling them. Nobody's saying, hey, this is private property, you can't be on it. And the reason they don't is because every year the government can say, well, we've got a bigger homeless issue. We're going to have to expand that department. We need more money for the homeless department, and we're going to hire, 5,000 more people to deal with the homeless. And so government just keeps growing, and they never really solve any of the problems. Because if they actually did solve the problems, the need for them would go away. And so you get these really negative feedback loops that run, and it hurts everybody except for the person that's making the really big, fat, nice government salary and, pulling down $250,000, $300,000 a year, not working too hard, and lots of time off, and then a big pension when you get to the end of your career. And so that's kind of what dictates things now, and it's not great for people.
And to echo what Floyd's talking about here, if you ever look and see, folks, on a map, the 10 richest by income counties in the United States, 5 of them are right outside Washington, D.C. I mean, you traditionally you would think, well, New York City, Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, Scottsdale, or whatever. No. The 5 counties right outside DC make up half of it. All right, let's shift topics a little bit, Floyd. Big news today. There was a ceasefire announced in the Israeli-Hamas conflict. But Floyd, in my view, the news story, I mean, that's great news if it holds. It's supposed to happen within an hour or so. But the big thing that just shocked me, 75% of Israelis did not want to have a ceasefire. I mean, and people in this country, Bernie Sanders introducing a resolution to block arms sales to Israel while rockets are raining down on Israel. And Floyd, we've talked about this almost every day this week. I am shocked, generally shocked, surprised how far left the Democratic Party has moved in its relationship to Israel. I mean, you have squad members, AOC, Tlaib, that whole group basically wanting to hold up arms sales to Israel. You got Bernie Sanders. You've got a lot of people in Congress that you would think they used to be friends with Israel. Now they're on the Palestinian side. Black Lives Matter comes out and says, we're for the Palestinians. I mean, the far left in this country, Floyd, that to me has been the story. And then also the media, the way they've treated this. I know that the media is going to show dead Palestinian girls and rubble and all that. I mean, that just comes with the territory. Every time Hamas launches rockets, and they use these Palestinian young girls as human shields. I know that's going to happen. But when the media in this country, particularly the far left wingers, MSNBC, CNN, start championing this stuff, the Palestinians, then I'm saying, my God, I know the far left is moving left, but this, Floyd, this takes the cake. Your comments on this?
Yeah, and there's a question in there somewhere, but I want to unpack that piece by piece because
I got
you just covered the countryside, and there's a lot to dig into there. First and foremost, we're always happy when a ceasefire happens after 11 days of combat. But you have to realize this was started by Hamas. You know, if the Palestinians wouldn't launch these campaigns against Israel, there wouldn't be war in the Middle East. Okay, Israel wants peace and has stood for peace and has fought for peace really since the beginning of their existence in 1948. The existence of Israel is very important because it says something to the world, and it's just really simple. By Israel existing, it says never again. And I'm talking about the Holocaust, okay? When the Jews were slaughtered by Hitler in Europe, and then they were further slaughtered by Stalin in Russia and by communists in Eastern Europe, they didn't have any place to go. They didn't have a refuge. But after 1948, the Jewish people, when they have faced that kind of oppression and faced genocide like they did during World War II, they now have a refuge, a place to go, and that's the state of Israel. And that's why Israel is so important to really the civil rights of all of us, because we put down a marker and said we're never going to allow genocide again. And so I like to kind of start with that foundation when I talk about Israel, because Israel is all about ending genocide. Now, the Palestinian conflict is really, in my opinion, you know, a conflict that is fostered by the West. There really shouldn't be a conflict, but we have poured money into the Gaza Strip. We've poured money into refugee camps in Lebanon and in Jordan for decades now. And that money empowers these political leaders in these jurisdictions to really not care about their citizens. And it empowers them to really run dictatorships that are all focused on hatred of Israel and anti-Semitism. So if you want to look at who's responsible, look right to the Biden administration. President Trump had made some great moves and had cut off a lot of money to these radical organizations. And he had stopped this nonsensical deal with Iran. And you know, Obama was sending plane loads of money over to Iran, and it was stopped by President Trump. And that's why we've had really unbelievable peace over the last 4 years. I mean, remember how they said when President Trump moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the way, oh, it's going to lead to a huge war. Well, it didn't, because President Trump had very systematically ended the money that the U.S. was providing to empower that war. But one of the first things Biden did when he got in was he flipped the switch again and started sending money to terrorists. So shame on President Biden and his administration for doing that. So the first time there was, you know, issues in Israel, Hamas started raining down these missiles on unsuspecting citizens. First, they rained them down on Jerusalem, then they rained them down on Tel Aviv. And their whole operation was intended to, number one, maximize citizen casualties. Now, Israel, because of the Iron Dome and because of the Patriot missile, it was able to defeat much of it. but
Not all.
still, you need to understand the motivation of Hamas, and it's really an evil motivation, because what they want to do is they basically have the same agenda as Hitler, and that is to drive the Jewish people into the sea and to end them as a race. And it's a very toxic and very evil belief structure. So
Plus, they're backed by the Iranians.
Plus they're backed by the Iranians. So, 11 days in, thankfully, when Hamas starts these things, Israel ends them, because they have made some great strides on the ground. They had this system of tunnels that they called the subway, or the metro, I think they called it, underneath Gaza. And all of these tunnels are where Hamas hides their missiles, and they have their infrastructure, and they love to pop out of these tunnels and grab Israeli citizens or grab Israeli soldiers and hold them as hostages. Israel had mapped that entire metro. And as a result of that, they were able to pinpoint strike right at the Hamas infrastructure. And they did a fabulous job over the last 11 days to take out much of Hamas's command and control and weapons infrastructure. So they did a great job. Mm-hmm. And I understand why Israelis don't want a ceasefire. They want to see the Israeli military and the capability of Hamas or Islamic Jihad to rain missiles down on their population. And I would want the same thing if I was an Israeli citizen. So frankly, I think it's great that we're getting a ceasefire. I am hopeful that the only reason that we've accepted, that Israel's accepted a ceasefire, is because they have taken out enough of Hamas's capabilities that the missiles are not a threat or a significant threat as they were 11 days ago. So let's hope that there's been some great progress made. Clearly Hamas paid a huge price, a much bigger price, I think, than they expected to pay. And I think they're surprised that the world isn't rallying to their cause. Not even the Arab world is rallying to their cause, because their cause has been exposed for the evil cause that it is. And it's just, pure hate. And they've got to give up that hatred. If they want, to be left alone, and if they want to, build a life for themselves, they need to give up hate and start building their life rather than trying to tear down or destroy somebody else's life.
Floyd, I couldn't agree with you more. And my personal sense is, I know the Egyptians are being credited with sort of mediating this. If that is, that's great news. But I sort of share your belief. I think that Hamas is coming to the table because, frankly, they've had such degradation of their military assets. At a certain point, you have to say enough is enough. And I think that's the point we're at. But I want to address one other point you made. My belief is that the reason some of the other Arab neighbors did not come to support the Palestinians this time is because of what President Trump did with the Abraham Accords. I mean, when President Trump left office, people said, he can't do anything with Israel and the Arabs. Well, he did. And all of a sudden in his last 6 months in office, month after month, a new Arab country in Israel announced an economic relationship. Flights were resumed. Commerce was being initiated. And again, when Joe Biden took office, Israel was probably in as good a relationship with his neighbors as it had been any time in its history. And now, 4 months into Biden, we've had to deal with this. But I want to ask you one other point.
But shame on President Biden for refilling the coffers with money of those terrorists.
Exactly.
I mean, there's no excuse for American money to be funding Hamas, and it is.
And that leads me to my next question. In the Democratic Party right now, Floyd, 38% of the Democrats, that's a big number, they blame Israel for this conflict and not Hamas, which is the ones that started launching the rockets.
Yeah, well, it shows you the news they're reading must be really bad, because the rockets came from Gaza, not from Israel. It's obvious who started it. It's completely obvious. And I've spent time in Israel. Israel is a wonderful country to visit. It's a beautiful country, and it has a lot to offer. And I think that I can understand why these socialists don't like Israel existing, because Israel kind of, you know, kills their thesis. The thesis is, you know, socialism works. Well, you got socialism in Gaza, and you can see what you have there, and you've got much more freedom in Israel. Freedom works. And you know, anyone that's a socialist, and if they have ever studied anything about the Soviet Union or read China, or they have looked at the way these different peoples have fared under socialism,
Cuba, Venezuela.
that if they had any sense whatsoever, they'd be running the opposite direction. They are just, I think, power hungry fools. And you know, my biggest issue is, why would someone support a Bernie Sanders? Why would you vote for a Ilhan Omar? Why would you vote for, you know, this woman Tlaib? Why are they even in Congress? They don't just hate Israel, Mark. They hate America. That's really important for people to understand. They don't just hate Israel. They hate the US Constitution. They hate our way of life. They hate that we're successful. And they want to bring us down. They're envious, unhappy, bitter people. And that's really the root core of the issues.
No, it absolutely is, Floyd. And that, again, whether you're talking the situation with Israel, you're talking voting rights, you're talking economic policies, this administration is getting pushed to the left by these very people. And, you know, for the life of me, the Democratic Party, the old, you know, the party of my father and your father, that used to be the old moderate Democrats, that doesn't hardly exist anymore. A handful, maybe, you know, the Mansions and the Cinemas of the world. But most of the Democrats, again, when these numbers come out, I see 38%, you know, they blame Israel. And then I see all these socialist policies that the Biden administration is pushing. You know, we clearly have to stand up to this, which is, again,
well, this is a Democratic Party that doesn't even want to salute the flag. I mean, when they see the flag and when they hear the national anthem, they want to take a knee because they disrespect the country. They dislike the Constitution. They want to overthrow and change the Constitution. They want to overthrow and change free enterprise. Yeah. And frankly, you know, they're dangerous.
Oh, very dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's, you know, I try not to be alarmist.
No, but these are just facts. I mean, this it is one great commentator said, it is what it is. And this is what we're dealing with. I used to talk a lot prior to those Georgia elections when we lost those 2 Senate seats. I said, folks, if we don't win at least one of these seats, we've got some risk of very, very bad legislation coming down the pack. Well, it happened, and now people are seeing the destruction that can happen even when you're in a 50-50 Senate. Boy, can you imagine the situation this country would be in right now? Let's say that Senate wasn't 50-50 and the results hadn't turned out reasonably well for us in that last election. If we had a 53-47 or 52-48, a lot of really horrific legislation like DC statehood, like these SB1, the voting rights thing, where the federal government's trying to take over voting rights that are clearly in the purview of the states. I mean, you think spending's been bad so far, folks? There's $4 trillion staring you right in the barrel of a gun, no pun intended. And it looks like it may get whittled down some because Democrats don't want to pass all those tax increases that Biden's talking about. But Floyd, we're a handful of representatives on the Senate side away from, I'm not trying to paraphrase, folks, from a disaster. And on the House side of the ledger, you know, right now it's very close. 219, 211, there's 5 open seats. Floyd, in my view, there's a damn good chance through redistricting, these horrific policies that Biden's putting forth, and just the sheer changes that normally happen in a midterm, I think Republicans really going to have to fall over backwards not to gain control of the House in the 2022 midterms.
Well, that's why they want S1, because S1 is really a Crooked Politicians Act that empowers them to basically steal elections. And, just think about how the world has changed since January. The border was calm. Now we have an unbelievable crisis at the border. I live in Arizona, and crime is up in Phoenix. Trafficking of children and trafficking of young girls has skyrocketed. Drug trafficking is through the roof. They're bringing, methamphetamine and opioids and propofol and all of these very, very dangerous drugs across the border, basically by the truckload, to poison America and America's youth. This all has happened in 6 months. The homeless crisis has spun out of control. Our nation's capital is locked down like it's a Soviet state. Gas prices, you go to the gas station and I think, gas has gone up easily $1 a gallon just in the last 6 months. And so people's lives are demonstrably worse. Yeah. And yet the media hasn't even noticed any of it.
Oh no, they champion Joe Biden as the hero for helping the little guy and passing this needed spending bills. Folks, in that first bill, the 1.9 trillion, a lot of that money went to cities and states, the Democratic bailout fund for their big blue city spenders. And yet, as Floyd mentioning, these problems persist. And not only that, we talked about, we used to have a stable border. Now we had 178,000 people crossing April of this year, folks, 178,000.
And it's different, Mark, than it used to be. In the old days, they were coming here for jobs,
right?
But that's not the case anymore. Now they're coming here for handouts and giveaways. I saw a cartoon the other day that showed 2 homeless vets sitting on a street corner, and they were holding a newspaper that was talking about how Biden was providing hotels for illegal aliens. And they're veterans who gave to their country, and yet they don't get the free hotel room. No. It's all of the priorities have gone the wrong way. I understand we've needed immigration over the course of the history of the country when we had a shortage of workers. But right now, what we have is a situation where people are coming here for the goodies, for a free college education, for welfare, and for free housing. And that is only a situation that is going to fester and cause just all kinds of problems in the long run.
Boy, just news came out today, 61,000 migrants were moved from the border area to different parts of the United States, basically in the dark of night. I mean, there were reports about people being moved to Tennessee, and Tennessee elected officials weren't even told about what was happening. This literally broke today, and yet we have a vice president supposedly in charge of this. Day 57, no news conference, no nothing. Floyd, nothing's happening now.
No, they're very specifically moving them to red states and red congressional districts, because if you read S1, if you can get across the border, you can vote. And so their hope is that these people will continue to empower them so that they can empower this welfare state. It's a maniacal drive for power. They want these people for votes, and they really don't care about the people. I mean, can you imagine all these unaccompanied minors that are coming across the border? Most of them are going to end up in prostitution. They're going to end up, being drug dealers. They're going to end up in the most horrific of situations. They don't care about these young people. They're just hoping that they'll vote Democrat when they're here.
That's exactly right. And the other thing that you mentioned about the drugs coming across, the cartels are making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, because nobody gets across that border without a cartel escort. And so we have the crime, we have the drugs, we have just today they announced two detention centers were closed because of abuse of the unaccompanied minors who were in these facilities, Floyd. I mean, again, it seems like, folks, we're not trying to bitch and complain about this stuff, but this kind of, when you look back where we were 4 or 5 months ago, and again, 95% of the coverage on President Trump was negative because the media hated him. And yet,
no, it was 99.9% of the coverage was negative.
as
I don't think he got a 0.5% of coverage that was positive. And it was the greatest single manipulation of America's minds I've ever seen. And then you lay on top of it, the news media was monolithic, but then the social media platforms, if President Trump did anything positive, they canceled it out by removing the posts or, taking President Trump out of Twitter, taking him off of Facebook, trying to delegitimize him. And it's really un-American what they did.
No, there's no question about it. Hey, I want to turn to some economic things, Floyd, because right now the big issue in this country among employers, they can't hire people. We've got 8 million jobs open. Okay. We've got 8 to 10 million unemployed. And this is not funny, folks, but I'm going to make it a little humorous for you. In certain states where people were looking to hire, they might get one. I heard a story, I was listening to radio, it said one or two people may come for a job. All of a sudden, the states no longer are accepting the $300 federal unemployment to go on top of the state per week. Folks, I mean, the break-even point, Floyd, was $32,000 based upon what you could be paid versus staying at home. All of a sudden now, 22 states, almost all 22 Republican governors, now they're not accepting that $300 a week federal. All of a sudden, a guy who had 1 or 2 people applying for a job, next time, once these unemployment things stop, 60 people applied for a position, of which only 1 or 2 did a day before. Floyd, we've been paying people for the past couple of months more not to work than to work.
I'm one of those businesses, Mark, that has a number of different jobs out for, and we're trying to find people, and it's very difficult. Part of the problem too is our schools are so bad that even when people graduate from college, they're unprepared for the information age. And these high-tech jobs, especially in STEM, the science and technology, people aren't prepared to work because our schools, which are, actually, I guess they're not even meeting anymore in a lot of places. They've gone virtual.
Teachers
but
come back.
The schools are run by a bunch of unions, and they're teaching them things about intersectionality and racism and critical race theory, and they're not teaching them mathematics. In fact, I heard one commentator call mathematics racist.
Yeah.
And so you have, not only do you have a shortage of people applying for the jobs that are available, the people that are applying aren't qualified for the jobs, but because businesses are so desperate to hire people, they hire them. And then what they have to do is then train them for the job, because the schools do such a pitiful job of training them. That's why America's falling behind as a country. And that's what's so damaging to the long run, is America's falling behind, and we're falling behind countries where children are still required to meet certain standards, where schools are required to meet certain standards. And America's future is dimming. And this generation of politicians, it's kind of living off the wealth that was stored up for them by the greatest generation, and they're eating the seed corn. And once the seed corn's gone, people are going to wake up, and the Great Reset is people are going to be much poorer than they are today. And that's the sad thing is that most millennials today will never be as wealthy as their parents were.
Well, speaking of millennials, Floyd, you talked to me prior to the show about a poll that you recently came across. And I'm not going to steal your hand. Share with our audience what you saw and what the societal implications of that.
Yeah, there's a, a university here in Arizona called Arizona Christian University, and it has a a special center that studies all kinds of different things around religion and people's feelings about God and what have you. And one of the biggest single changes that we've seen as we've moved from the baby boom generation to the millennials is that there's been this dramatic reduction in the number of people that, number one, even believe in God. And then number two, even think God or spiritual things are relevant to their lives. And this is very significant for America because America was founded on biblical principles. And you had to kind of start with the 10 Commandments and then from there build out. One of the things is thou shalt not, steal, and thou shalt not covet. But today, if you don't believe in God, then, theft and coveting what your neighbor has and taking it seems to be okay. So now we actually have government that's empowering covetousness, and you have government that's empowering theft. And it does not speak well for the future of America. And what we really need is a spiritual renewal. It's got to begin in the heart. People's hearts have to be changed. And so, it is a very sad thing. Only 43% of millennials, believe in God. And that's,
way
much different. When I was a young man, 80% of us believed in God. And not only that, church attendance has just plummeted. And the coronavirus has only increased that because there's still almost 25% of churches that have never reopened from the pandemic. And there's a good chance they're never going to reopen. That means this spiritual hole that we have inside of us isn't going to get filled. And that is really what creates the goodwill that allows our society to work. It was de Tocqueville that said that America is great because America is good, and that goodness dissipates away without a spiritual foundation. And that's why our streets have more crime, more issues, and it's very sad, Mark. I'm a strong believer in Jesus, so I pray for our country. I pray every night, dear Lord, help this land, and I'm hopeful that there will be some kind of a spiritual renewal in America, because I think it's really important if America is going to go on as a beacon of freedom to the globe, which it's been. You remember Ronald Reagan said, each generation, we're only one generation away from slavery. I don't want to be a slave.
No.
America's free because of our belief in freedom.
Floyd, this has been an outstanding show. I love your commentary. And traditionally, folks, what we like to do at the end, we talk about issues that happen in the country. We have to, because we have to tell you on this outlet and others in conservative media what's really happening, just like Western Journal, which is Floyd's company. So I want to share two things with our audience. And then, Floyd, I'd like you to sort of close it out with some. I know you're a positive view. You're optimistic about America. You've got that red, white, and blue just comes through. Folks, I want to share this just for all of our viewers here. Floyd Brown will soon be a member of the board of directors of our company, Conservative Broadcast Media and Journalism. Floyd will be a board member coming up probably in a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, as soon as we close. Our company, Conservative Broadcast Media and Journalism, is doing a transaction with one of Floyd's subsidiaries, USA Depot, or commonly referred to as Patriot Depot, where these businesses will be combined. So folks, for a full disclosure and my distinct privilege Floyd, I want to welcome you to the board of directors when we close of Conservative Broadcast Media and Journalism. And
well, Mark, I'm very excited about working more closely with you to bring truth to the American people. And you're right, I am an optimist, and Ronald Reagan was always an optimist. He believed that America's greatest days are ahead. And despite everything that's going on, I still believe that. Interestingly enough, a lot of the immigrants that come to America are some of the most conservative people that are here, and so that's good for the future. And I think truth will win out in the end. I mean, darkness pervades at times, but then the sunlight comes out and breaks through. And so, just as Donald Trump was elected and Ronald Reagan was elected, I think that you'll probably see a change in the government in a year, in the midterms, and in 3 years in the executive branch. And I'm excited that will kind of reverse this trend and take America back in a much more positive direction. But conservative broadcast and media journalism is going to be there every step of the way. And I know your show is going to be there every step of the way. And so anytime you want to have me back to discuss these issues with you, I'm always available. And thank you for what you do. And I'm looking forward to working with you.
Well, likewise, Floyd. And folks, I'm just so happy that we could bring this to you today and share that news with you. You're going to be seeing a lot of Floyd and I working together, and I got a funny sneaking suspicion that there'll be a few more deals that will be announced in the coming months. So Floyd, thanks for joining me today. Folks, thanks for watching this week. We've had some really high-powered topics, a lot of controversial issues, and with this administration going the way it is, this is not going to stop. But we have to be out there every day telling you what's going on, giving you the right perspective. And hopefully, as Floyd mentioned, as we go towards 2022, people will realize, hey, I really had it pretty good under Trump. I may not have liked his personality, but boy, his policies were really good. Anyhow, that's the subject for another debate. Thanks again, Floyd. Folks, thanks for watching. Have a safe weekend coming up. We will be back in studio on Monday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you then.